All right, we're here in section 2 of Introduction to Technical Flats, and we're talking about scale. You can read more in the PDF document that comes along with these videos, but I just wanted to quickly touch on the difference between eighth scale, proportional scale, and what blocks are. So I just pulled out some of my old flats from when I used to draw in eighth scale. And the way the eighth scale works, I'm just going to pull up my grid here, just like we talked about in the last video. And the way the eighth scale works is each one of these little squares is equal to 1 inch in real life. And so the way that you draw in eighth scale is you create a series of guides. You can use your rulers and guides, or you can use lines. You can see that I actually have a line already drawn in here from when I was creating the flats. And you're actually taking the real measurements from the garment that you're creating your flat from. So for these, I took a shirt that I wanted to use the sizing from, varying it based on like what the neckline I wanted and stuff like that. And it is actually true to size. Now you can see that it kind of looks a little funky. Ignore these stylized lines that are put in here. I don't recommend drawing like that. And you probably have seen on my Instagram, I talk about that a lot, and I'll be doing a blog post on that. Depending on when you're viewing this video, it may or may not be up on my blog page. But you can see that you end up creating something that looks just slightly off. The armhole looks a little weird, and the reason for this is because you're taking a 3D object, a real life object, and you're putting it into 2D form, but you're still using those 3D measurements in order to create it. So there are some companies that still create their flats in eighth scale. It just kind of depends where you end up working or how you want your company to be form set up. But what I recommend instead is to create blocks that are in proportional scale. And this is what most companies are doing now. And that's what you're seeing here. This is how most flats are created these days. And the reason for that is when you're drawing an eighth scale, let's say you have created a t-shirt and you sent off these flats to your factory, you just got your proto back in. And what is going to happen if you decide to change the shoulder width or anything like that? You have to change your flat to match that. With proportional scale, you don't have to worry about those like small measurements that you're changing, because your flat isn't based off that. It's based off what you really want your garment to look like, and is a good visual representation of what you want it to look like. So that's what you're seeing here. And proportional scale is attempting to make the flat look as close as possible to what you want the garment to look like in real life without having to worry about little measurements or like the actual measurements that make up the garment. You really just want it to look as true to life as possible. And that makes it a little bit easier when you're sending things off to the factory, because if you're creating your flats in eighth scale, the factory will take that very, very literally. And I have had experiences where the factory will even go in and measure the flat, regardless of what your tech pack actually says. And that is basically duplicating the information that you're giving them. You're giving them a flat that has measurements, and you're giving them a spec sheet that has measurements. And you really, really want to avoid duplicating information in the tech pack so as not to confuse people. You want the information to be in one place only. So I definitely recommend drawing in proportional scale. And as you practice creating flats, that'll get easier and easier. once you create them, it will start to click when you see that something's a little too wide, something's a little too long, the armhole's not quite right. And you'll start to realize when those things are. Then I wanted to quickly touch on blocks. So basically, this is just this outline of this flat, which we'll be getting into flats in a second, or in the next section. But what blocks do for you is, instead of having to continually redraw this outline for every single thing, if you're constantly creating t-shirts, for example, or jackets or something like that, you can have just the outline so that all of your flats are consistent.